I must celebrate Caribbean Literature Day. Caribbean writers filled my youth with joy and hope. I must have been in my early teens when I stumbled upon several bookshelves downstairs the Central Library in Castries, St. Lucia. These shelves were filled with texts of West Indian literature. They were caged on the lock and key, but I could see the titles through the wire netting. During my visits to the library, I would angle my neck so I could read the titles on the spines, then call the librarian to open up for me. It is through those texts that I became introduced to the Caribbean. It is through those texts that I began to develop a Caribbean identity. It is there that I became more curious about Caribbean history and society. I found copies of Walcott's early texts there, such as In a Green Night, The Castaway and Other Poems, The Gulf and Other Poems, Another Life, Sea Grapes, and The Star Apple Kingdom. At that point, I hardly understood any of the poems in these collections. I would appreciate them much later. However, there is one that was fairly easy to decipher. It is entitled A City's Death by Fire. It goes like this. After that hot gospeler had leveled all but the church and sky, I wrote the tale by Tallow of a city's death by fire. Under candle's eye that smoked in tears, I wanted to tell in more than wax of faiths that were snapped like wire. All day I walked among the rubbled tales, shocked at each wall that stood on the street like a liar. Loud was the bird rock sky, and all the clouds were bales, torn open by looting, and white in spite of the fire. By the smoking sea where Christ walked, I asked, why should a man wax tears when his wooden world fails? In town, leaves were paper, but the hills were a flock of faiths. To a boy who walked all day, each leaf was a green breath, rebuilding a love I thought was dead as nails, blessing the death and the baptism by fire. The poem records the poet's perspective of an actual fire that destroyed a large section of the city of Castries when the poet was 18 years old. The images in the poem speak to the conflicting loyalties experienced by the young poet. St. Lucia was still a British colony at the time, with a small following of Protestants to which the poet and his family belonged. Yet there was a more deeply entrenched history of French colonization as reflected in the huge and dominant Roman Catholic Church. The dominant religion was oppressive, and this culture was upheld by the ruling class who resided around the city square. Much of the colonial architecture that surrounded what was then known as Columbus Square was destroyed, and the fire seemed to promise a baptism, a new beginning. But the tall stone church stood against it defiantly. Subsequent to that tragic event, the British would construct several new buildings for public administration, as well as for housing. There was so much history in that sonnet by Derek Walcott. I would be inspired to keep going back to the library to try to understand more of his work. In those shelves of the Central Library, I also found the writers from Guyana. I fell in love with Edgar Mittelholzer. In those days, I loved to read novels, and I cherished A Morning at the Office. The Mittelholzer text that really gripped me, though, were the Kewana series. The Mittelholzer novels chronicled events in the lives of families born out of the clash of races and cultures, and described quite starkly the violence and anguish characterizing the relationships, fraught with the conflict that stemmed from the divided loyalties. The novels give an insight into the vastness of the Guyana hinterland, of the Dutch and African lineages entangled in the deep forest. Also, from Guyana were the novels of Wilson Harris, introducing me to a new kind of writing, a non-realistic genre that would take me a long time to understand. Harris's novels took me on journeys up the rivers into the interior of Guyana. I saw the rapids and the huge trees. His journeys, though, were always metaphorical. They appeared to be journeys into the history as well as into the West Indian psyche. I found Wilson intriguing and exciting. It was the poet Martin Carter, however, that really spoke to me from Guyana. Carter was radical and political. He wrote against political oppression. He wrote for liberation from colonialism. He expressed a yearning for peace and a decent quality of life. He was a strong voice, and his poetry is absolutely memorable. I would like to share one of them. This is the dark time, my love. This is the dark time, my love. All round the land, brown beetles crawl about. The shining sun is hidden in the sky. Red flowers bend their heads in awful sorrow. This is the dark time, my love. It is the season of oppression, dark metal, and tears. It is the festival of guns, the carnival of misery. Everywhere, the faces of men are strained and anxious. Who comes walking in the dark night time? Whose boot of steel trumps down the slender grass? It is the man of death, my love, the strange invader, watching you sleep and aiming at your dream. Those bookshelves of West Indian literature were a real treasure. I send an abundance of blessings to the librarian who was responsible. Right there, I became introduced to Trinidad and Tobago. Michael Anthony's The Year in San Fernando and Green Days by the River. These novels were so relatable to me as a teenager. I swear that I lived completely through the main characters. Many years later, when I visited Trinidad, I was eager to see the town of San Fernando. It would be the same with V.S. Naipaul. He introduced me to the Indians of Trinidad. Although my own mother's roots are also East Indian, I knew nothing of Indian religions and culture. Naipaul pulled me into the interesting worlds of Indian domestic and political complexities that he describes in novels such as A House for Mr. Biswas and The Suffrage of Elvira. Samuel Selvon equals Michael Anthony in capturing my boyhood heart. His collection of stories, Ways of Sunlight, is truly a gem. Not only because of the hilarious descriptions, but because it illustrates characters trying to survive on the move, migrating from countryside to town, from Caribbean to England. We see cultural change and adaptation, and his use of English Creole brought the characters closer to home, rendering them and the situations in which they found themselves more believable. George Lamin's books were also on the West Indian bookshelves in the Central Library of Castries. The very titles were so captivating. In the Castle of My Skin, Of Age and Innocence, The Immigrants. My young mind struggled to understand Lamin, but what I took away from him was an interest in defining the cultural peculiarities of what it is to be West Indian. I also found a copy of Brathwaite's The Arrivants at the Central Library. I knew that it was important, and I read much of it. I can't say that I understood what he was saying. However, his writing was different. The sound and the repetition in Negus captivates. Much later, the work of Gordon Roulette and Maureen Warner Lewis and lectures by Mervyn Morris at Mona would bring more clarity to Brathwaite's poetry. Negus. It is not, it is not, it is not, it is not enough. It is not enough to be free of the red, white, and blue of the dragon. It is not. It is not. It is not enough. It is not enough to be free of the whips, principalities, and powers. Where is your kingdom of the word? It is not. It is not. It is not enough. It is not enough to be free of malarial fevers, fear of the hurricane, fear of invasions, crops, droughts, fires, blisters upon the cane. It is not enough to tinkle to work on a bicycle bell when hell crackles and burns into 14-inch screen of the Japanese constructed United Fruit Company imported hard cell telltale television set, rhinocerously knobbed, cancerously tubed. It is not. It is not. It is not enough to be able to fly to Miami, structure skyscrapers, excavate the moonscape seashore sands, to build hotels, casinos, sepulchres. It is not. It is not. It is not enough. It is not enough to free to bulldoze squatters from their tunes, from their relics, from their tombs of drums. It is not enough to pray to Barclays bankers on the telephones, to Jesus Christ by shortwave radios, to the United States Marines by rattling your hip bones. I must be given words to shape my name to the syllables of trees. I must be given words to refashion features like a healer's hand. I must be given words so that the bees in my blood's buzzing brain of memory will make flowers, will make flocks of birds, will make sky, will make heaven. The heaven open to the thunderstorm and the volcano and the unfolding land. It is not. It is not. It is not enough to be pause, to be whole, to be void, to be silent, to be semicolon, to be semicolony. Fling me the stone that will confound the void. Find me the rage and I will raise the colony. Fill me with words and I will blind your God. Atibon legba, Atibon legba, ouvri baya pour moi, ouvri baya pour moi. I also found literature from Jamaica on the West Indian bookshelves. The Children of Sisyphus by Orlando Patterson, Under the Window by John Hearne, the novels of Roger May. Later I would study May's Brotherman for CXC literature with Mr. Jeremy Joseph. And this text, like Patterson's Sisyphus, would introduce me to the degrading living conditions experienced by blacks in some parts of Kingston. I would become more conscious of the tragic legacies of slavery in the West Indies. Anthologies of Jamaican folk tales by writers such as Philip Sherlock would cause me to reflect upon our own St. Lucian folklore and the merits of our indigenous cultural expressions. Anthologies of poetry as well would introduce me to the poetry of Claude McKay, that Jamaican poet who was a part of the Harlem Renaissance. McKay would be the portal through which I would take an interest in black American writers such as Langston Hughes, James Baldwin. I still remember McKay's If We Must Die, and I Shall Return. The latter's expression of nostalgia for the Caribbean was enlightening in that, and it stirred feelings of pride. If We Must Die was strong and communicated faith. My pride in Caribbean literature was heartened when later I would learn that Winston Churchill had used the poem to inspire his soldiers during the Second World War. If We Must Die by Claude McKay. If we must die, let it not be like hogs hunted and penned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, baking their mock at our accursed lot. If we must die, oh, let us nobly die, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. Even then the monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us though dead. O kinsmen, we must meet the common foe. Though far outnumbered, let us show us brave, and for the 1,000 blows deal one death blow. What though before us lies the open grave, like men will face the murderous cowardly pack, pressed to the wall dying, but fighting back. I celebrate Caribbean literature. Our Caribbean writers help me to relate to the rest of the Caribbean, to develop a sense of camaraderie with my brothers and sisters from other territories in the region. I was able to relate to the descriptions of the landscape, the trees, the plants, the birds, the descriptions of the sea, the beaches, the fishing coasts. I was able to identify with the struggles for survival, the poverty, workplaces of the fields, savannas, and the estates. I was able to identify with the festivals, the foods, the music, and the dances, the community gatherings at cricket and football. My early visits to that central library in Castries, St. Lucia, laid for me a solid foundation for my future appreciation of the many writers whose work I would meet later as well. Those future writers, those current writers, I can appreciate them more because I appreciated the foundation that was established by these early post-colonial writers. Oh, how I love and how I keep appreciating Caribbean literature. Happy Caribbean Literature Day. Thank you.